The funeral home smelled like gardenias and central air conditioning. I stood at the front of the room in a black dress I had owned for 11 years, bought for my aunt's funeral, never imagined I'd wear it for my husband's. Derek was in the casket. 63 people sat behind me, and every single one of them knew he didn't die at home. He died in her bed, in her apartment, in Buckhead, at 2:47 in the morning on a Tuesday. The hospital called me. Not her. Me. Because I was still his wife. Because that part, the legal part, the binding part, the part that actually meant something when the paperwork was filed, that part was still mine. Lorraine, his mother, stood on the other side of the casket. She hadn't looked at me once. Not when I walked in. Not when the pastor spoke. Not when they played Derek's favorite song and half the room started crying. She was already calculating. I could see it in the way she held her purse tight, close, ready. 72 hours later, she knocked on my door. She didn't know I'd been ready since the phone rang. Before we go any further, what time is it where you are right now? Drop your time and your country in the comments. I want to know who's up with me for this one. The house on Cascade Road was mine before Derek ever walked through the front door. I bought it in October 2011, 3 years before we got married. I was 31 years old, working as a contracts manager for a commercial construction firm downtown, and I had saved $94,000 over 7 years. Not because anyone told me to, not because I had a financial advisor or a family with money, but because I grew up watching my mother borrow from people who made her feel small every time she did. And I decided at 19 that I would never be in that position. The down payment was $87,500. I remember the number exactly because I had written it on a Post-it note on my bathroom mirror for 4 years. When I finally wrote the check, I sat in my car in the parking lot of the title company for 6 minutes before going inside. Not from fear, from something quieter than that. From the understanding that this was the thing I had been building toward, and that now it was real, and that real things can be taken from you if you are not careful. Derek and I met 8 months after I closed on the house. A mutual friend's birthday dinner at a restaurant in Virginia Highland. He was funny. He was charming in the way that men who grew up with older sisters sometimes are attuned present, able to ask questions and actually listen to the answers. He was a project manager for a mid-size logistics company, made decent money, dressed well, called when he said he would call. We dated for 2 years. Got engaged on a Sunday morning in my kitchen. No grand gesture, just him sliding a ring across the breakfast table and saying, "I've been carrying this for 3 weeks. I keep waiting for the right moment, and I think this is it." I said yes. We got married in May 2014 in a small ceremony at a botanical garden in Decatur. 44 guests. My dress cost $800. The flowers were ranunculus and eucalyptus. It rained for exactly 11 minutes during the cocktail hour and then stopped. He moved into my house on Cascade Road. That was never a negotiation. It was simply geography and practicality. My mortgage was lower than any rent either of us could find near our jobs. His name was never on the deed. That was not a deliberate act of suspicion. It was simply that we never got around to it. And then time passed, and somewhere along the way, I stopped bringing it up, and he never asked. I paid the mortgage every month. He paid utilities and groceries. That was the arrangement we fell into without ever formally agreeing to it. For the first 4 years, it felt like partnership. We took 1 vacation a year, always domestic, always somewhere with a coastline. Tybee Island, Gulf Shores, Amelia Island. We had a standing Saturday morning routine farmers market coffee back home by noon. I refinished the hardwood floors in the hallway myself over a long weekend in 2017. Derek handed me tools and kept me company and ordered pizza both nights. Those were good years. I want to be precise about that because it would be easier, cleaner to say the marriage was always broken, that I should have seen it from the beginning, that there were signs I ignored out of foolishness or longing. But that wouldn't be true, and I don't have any interest in rewriting history to make myself feel less like someone who loved a man genuinely and got something unexpected in return. The change was gradual. That's the part nobody warns you about. They warn you about the dramatic things, the lipstick on the collar, the late-night text, the sudden password on a previously open phone. But before any of that, there is just a kind of cooling, a degree or two, barely perceptible. The way a room doesn't feel cold exactly, but you notice after a while that you've pulled your sleeves down. By 2022, we were friendly. We were cordial. We moved through the house like colleagues who respected each other, but had stopped being curious about each other. We still ate dinner together most nights. We still talked about work, about the neighbors, about whatever was happening in the news. But somewhere in the previous 2 years, something had shifted its weight, and neither of us had said anything about it. I told myself it was normal. 14 years, the long middle of a marriage. Everyone goes through it. I told myself a lot of things. The Post-it note is still in a box somewhere, the one from my bathroom mirror. $87.500. I never threw it away. I'm not sure why. Maybe because some part of me always knew that the house was the one thing in my life I had built entirely alone. And that mattered in a way I couldn't fully articulate. Until the morning a hospital called me at 2:47 a.m. to tell me my husband had gone into cardiac arrest in someone else's apartment. The Post-it note mattered then. It mattered a great deal. The first sign was a smell. Not perfume exactly. Something lighter than that. A body lotion maybe, or a hair product, something with vanilla, and something synthetic underneath the vanilla, the kind of scent that comes in a small white bottle from a boutique hotel bathroom. I noticed it on a Thursday evening in March, 8 months before Derek died. He had come home from what he said was a client dinner in Midtown, kissed me on the cheek in the kitchen, and gone upstairs to shower. I was loading the dishwasher. His suit jacket was draped over the back of a kitchen chair. I don't know why I picked it up. Habit, probably. I was going to hang it by the door. I held it for a moment longer than necessary. I put it back on the chair and finished the dishes and didn't say anything. That's the thing about the early signs, they don't arrive with labels. They arrive as small moments of stillness where you are holding something ordinary and feeling something that doesn't match the ordinary thing in your hands. You can't prosecute a feeling. You can't build a case on the fact that your husband's jacket smelled like someone else's bathroom. So you put the jacket back. You finish the dishes. You go to bed. Derek was already asleep when I got upstairs. Or he was pretending to be. I lay in the dark for a long time looking at the ceiling fan and listening to the particular quality of his breathing and thinking about nothing specific. The second sign came 6 weeks later. He started going to the gym on Wednesday evenings. This was not unusual in itself. Derek had always been intermittently health-conscious, cycling through phases of discipline that would last 3 or 4 months before quietly dissolving. But this time felt different in a way I couldn't immediately name. He was consistent. Every Wednesday 6:30 p.m. gym bag packed the night before. He started buying new workout clothes. He started being more particular about what he ate at dinner. I didn't say anything about this either. A man improving his habits is not evidence of anything except a man improving his habits. I told myself this firmly, and I believed it firmly, and I moved on. The third sign was the phone. Derek had never been secretive about his phone. For the first decade of our marriage, it sat on the kitchen counter on the coffee table on his nightstand face up. If it rang when he was in the shower, he'd call back to me to check who it was. That openness had never been something I consciously appreciated, because I had never had reason to notice it until it was gone. Sometime around May, he started keeping it in his pocket. Not dramatically, not the conspicuous guarding of a man who knows he's being watched. Just quietly, consistently in his pocket. Face down on the dinner table, taken into the bathroom. Plugged in on his side of the bed with the screen brightness turned all the way down. I noticed. I said nothing. In June, I found the handkerchief. I was sorting laundry, his work shirts, which I still washed separately because he was particular about the collar starch, and it fell out of the breast pocket of his navy suit. A white cotton handkerchief folded into a neat square. Nothing remarkable about it, except that I had never bought Derek a handkerchief in 14 years of marriage. He was not a handkerchief man. He used tissues from the box on his desk, like every other person born after 1960. I unfolded it. It was clean, pressed, monogrammed in pale blue thread, not Derek's initials. A single letter, S. I stood in the laundry room for a long time. The washing machine was running. The sound of the water filling the drum was very loud in the small space. I refolded the handkerchief exactly as I had found it. I put it back in the breast pocket. I washed the shirt. I hung it up. I did not confront him. I want to explain why, because I think people assume that silence in the face of evidence is weakness or denial or fear. It was none of those things. It was calculation. I am a contracts manager. I have spent 20 years reading documents that are designed to obscure what they actually mean. And the first rule I learned in that work is that you do not reveal what you know until you understand the full scope of what you are dealing with. You gather. You verify. You wait for the moment when the information is most useful to you. I was gathering. I pulled my credit report that weekend. Everything was clean on my end. I checked the mortgage account, current automatic payment, my name only. I logged into the joint checking account we kept for household expenses and looked back 6 months of transactions. There were withdrawal patterns I hadn't paid attention to before. $200 here, $350 there. ATM withdrawals from machines in Buckhead, which was 20 minutes from our house and nowhere near Derek's office. I wrote nothing down. I remembered everything. The last sign before the phone call was the trip to Charlotte. Derek told me in September that he had a 2-day conference in Charlotte logistics industry, something annual he had attended before. He showed me the registration email. He packed a bag on a Friday afternoon and kissed me goodbye and drove to the airport. I didn't check his location. I didn't call the hotel. I didn't do any of the things a suspicious wife is supposed to do in that moment. Instead, I called my attorney, not a divorce attorney, my estate attorney, the woman who had handled my property purchase in 2011 and updated my will in 2018. I told her I wanted to review everything. All of it. The deed, the will, the beneficiary designations on my 401k and my life insurance policy. She asked if everything was okay. I told her I just wanted to be thorough. We met the following Tuesday. Everything was exactly as I had left it. The house was mine. The accounts were mine. Derek was the beneficiary on my life insurance, but that was easily changed. And I changed it that afternoon to my younger sister, Renee. I drove home feeling something I can only describe as clarified. Not happy, not sad, just clear. 3 weeks later, the phone rang at 2:47 in the morning. The phone rang 4 times before I answered it, not because I was asleep. I had been awake since 2:00 a.m. one of those nights where sleep sits just at the edge of reach, and every time you get close to it, something pulls you back. I was lying on my side facing the window, watching the way the streetlight came through the gap in the curtains and made a thin line across the ceiling. Derek's side of the bed was empty. He had told me he was working late, that there was a logistics audit his company needed to finalize before the end of the quarter, that he might just sleep at the office rather than drive home at midnight. I had said okay. I had not asked follow-up questions. When the phone lit up on my nightstand, the caller ID said Piedmont Atlanta Hospital. I sat up. I answered on the fourth ring. The woman on the other end had a calm, practiced voice, the voice of someone who has made this kind of call hundreds of times and has learned that steadiness is the only useful thing she can offer. She told me her name. She told me she was a charge nurse in the cardiac care unit. She told me they had a patient brought in approximately 40 minutes ago by ambulance, that the patient had been identified by the ID in his wallet, and that the name on the emergency contact listed in their system was mine. She said Derek's full name. She said he had gone into cardiac arrest. I asked her what his condition was. She paused just a fraction of a second, the kind of pause that carries its own information. She told me he was gone, that the team had worked for 22 minutes, that there was nothing more they could do. I said, "Where was he when it happened?" Another pause, longer this time. She said, "He was brought in from a private residence in Buckhead. A woman at the residence called 911. I asked for the address. She gave it to me. I wrote it on the notepad I kept on my nightstand, a habit from years of middle-of-the-night work calls. I wrote the address in my regular handwriting, neat and small the way I wrote everything. I thanked her. I told her I would come in to handle the necessary paperwork. I hung up. I sat on the edge of the bed for a moment. The thin line of streetlight was still on the ceiling. The house was very quiet. I could hear the refrigerator running downstairs. Then I picked the phone back up, and I looked at the address I had written. It was an apartment building in Buckhead, one of the newer high-rises on Peachtree Road, the kind with a rooftop pool and a concierge and monthly rents that started at $2,800. I knew the building. I had driven past it on the way to a client meeting 6 months ago and noticed the construction had finally finished. I sat with that for a moment. Then I did something that I think surprised even me. I opened my laptop. I went to the Fulton County Property Records database, a tool I used regularly for work to verify ownership on construction sites before contracts were signed. I typed in the building address and pulled the unit records. The specific unit the nurse had referenced was listed as a rental. The leaseholder's name was not Derek's. It was Simone's last name, a name I did not yet know was Simone, only a woman's name attached to an apartment where my husband's heart had stopped beating at 2:07 in the morning. I closed the laptop. I got dressed. Black slacks, a gray blouse, the camel coat I kept by the front door. I did not rush. I moved through the house the way I always moved through it, steadily, purposefully turning off lights as I went. I drove to Piedmont Atlanta Hospital. It took 11 minutes at that hour, with no traffic. I parked in the visitor structure on the 3rd level. I took the elevator to the cardiac care unit. A different nurse met me at the desk. Younger, less practiced, visibly uncomfortable in the way that younger staff sometimes are when the paperwork situation is complicated. Because it was complicated. There was a woman already there. She was sitting in a chair against the wall near the nursing station, mid-30s, bone-straight press, a silk sleep set under a long cardigan she had clearly grabbed on the way out the door, mascara smudged under one eye. She was holding a paper cup of coffee with both hands and staring at the floor. When I walked in, she looked up. We looked at each other for a moment. The younger nurse stepped forward and said carefully, "Mrs. Ivy, this is—" "I know who she is," I said. I didn't know her name yet. But I knew who she was. The handkerchief had told me that much back in June. The Buckhead ATM withdrawals had told me more. The Charlotte trip that probably wasn't Charlotte had confirmed the rest. I turned to the nurse and asked for the paperwork. Simone stood up. She said my name, just my first name. Quietly, like a question or an apology, or both at once. I did not look at her again. I sat down at the desk across from the young nurse, and I began to go through the documents. Death certificate processing, personal effects, the ring, his wedding ring, and his watch in a small plastic bag. The signet ring on his right hand was not in the bag. I asked about it. The nurse checked the log. It had not come in with him. I noted that. I signed what needed to be signed. When I stood up to leave, Simone was still standing near the wall. She looked like she had been crying for hours and had run out of tears and didn't know what to do with what was left. I buttoned my coat. I said, "You should go home." I walked to the elevator. I pressed the button. I rode down to the 3rd level of the parking structure. I sat in my car in the dark for 4 minutes. Then I called my attorney. It was 4:23 in the morning. I left a voicemail. I said, "This is Ivy. Derek passed tonight. I need to meet with you as soon as possible to review the estate documents. All of them. Call me when you're in." I started the car. I drove home on empty streets through a city that didn't know yet what had happened. The radio was off. The heat was on low. I kept both hands on the wheel. I had a lot to think about. And for the first time in 8 months, I had all the information I needed to think clearly. My attorney called me back at 6:47 in the morning. Her name is Patricia Osei. She has been my attorney since 2011. She handled the closing on the house on Cascade Road, updated my will twice, reviewed every significant contract I have signed in the past 13 years. She is 61 years old, drives a burgundy Volvo, and has a framed needlepoint on her office wall that says, "The devil is in the details," in block letters. I have always appreciated that about her. She did not lead with condolences. She knew me well enough to understand that was not what I needed at 6:47 in the morning after the night I had just had. She said, "Tell me what you need." I told her I needed to sit down with all of it. The deed, the will, the estate documents, Derek's name on anything attached to my accounts. All of it reviewed, all of it confirmed before his family had time to make any moves. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "How much time do we have?" I told her Lorraine, Derek's mother, had called my cell phone at 5:15 in the morning. I had not answered. She had left a voicemail that was 4 minutes and 12 seconds long. I had listened to it once. I did not need to listen to it again to remember what it said. Lorraine had a gift for clarity when she wanted something. Patricia said, "Come in at 9. I arrived at her office on Peachtree Street at 8:53. I was wearing the same camel coat. I had not slept. I had showered and made coffee and sat at my kitchen table for an hour, doing nothing except being very still and letting my mind move through everything methodically, the way it did when I was preparing for a difficult contract negotiation. Patricia had the files already pulled when I walked in. She had been in the office since 7:30. That is the kind of attorney she is. We went through everything in order. The deed on the house on Cascade Road, Ivy alone. Purchased October 2011, refinanced in my name only in 2019 when the rates dropped. Derek had signed a quitclaim acknowledgement at the time of our marriage, confirming he had no ownership interest in the property, a document Patricia had insisted on, and that I had appreciated but never thought I would need. My personal checking and savings accounts, my name, only opened before the marriage never converted to joint. The joint household account, approximately $4,200 remaining. That account I would close this week. My 401k beneficiary updated to my sister Renee in October, 6 weeks before Derek died. Patricia confirmed the change had processed. My life insurance same, Renee confirmed. Derek's life insurance? He had a policy through his employer, $150,000. I was the named beneficiary. Patricia noted this and said she would begin the claims process. I stopped her there. I told her I didn't want to move on the life insurance yet. Not until I understood the full picture of what Derek had left behind, meaning what he owed, not what he owned. Patricia looked at me over her reading glasses. I told her about the Buckhead apartment. The ATM withdrawals from that neighborhood over the past 6 months. The credit card I had found referenced in a bank statement 3 months ago, a card in Derek's name alone, through a bank we had no joint accounts with. I had noted the card number, but had not pursued it further at the time. Patricia wrote everything down. She said she would subpoena the credit card records as part of the estate process. She said the results would tell us what we were dealing with before we made any decisions about the life insurance payout or how to respond to whatever Lorraine was planning. I asked her how long. She said, "Give me 72 hours on the credit card. I can get an emergency estate accounting started today." I said that was fine. Then I asked her the question I had come to ask, the one that mattered more than any of the others. I said, "If Lorraine or anyone in Derek's family tries to make a claim against the house, what is their position?" Patricia took off her reading glasses. She set them on the desk. She looked at me the way she had looked at me in 2011, when I sat across from her as a 31-year-old woman buying her first house alone. And she said exactly what I needed to hear. She said, "They have no position, Ivy. That house has your name on it, and only your name on it, going back 14 years. Derek had no legal interest in it. His family has no legal interest in it. If they file anything, it will be dismissed." I nodded. She put her glasses back on and said, "Is there anything else?" I told her there was one more thing. I told her I wanted to know the current market value of the house, not an estimate, an actual current comparative market analysis. I told her I had a real estate contact, a broker named James Whitfield, who had reached out to me twice in the past year about listing properties in the Cascade Heights area. I said I wanted to call him today. Patricia looked at me again, a different look this time. Something that was almost a smile, but not quite. She said, "Are you thinking about selling?" I said I was thinking about having the option. I left her office at 11:14. I sat in my car in the parking deck, and I called James Whitfield. He answered on the second ring. I told him I was ready to talk about the house. He told me the Cascade Heights market was moving fast right now. Comps in my neighborhood were coming in between $640,000 and $710,000 for a property like mine, and cash buyers were closing in 10 days or less. I told him I would be in touch. I drove home. I parked in the driveway of the house on Cascade Road, and I sat for a moment looking at the front of it. The Japanese maple in the yard had gone fully red for autumn. The porch light I had installed myself in 2016 was still working. The house looked exactly as it always had, solid maintained mine. Lorraine had called 3 more times while I was at Patricia's office. I had not answered any of them. I went inside. I made a sandwich I didn't eat. I sat at the kitchen table and I made a list, not on paper, just in my mind, the way I had always organized the things that mattered. What I knew, what I was waiting to confirm, what I would do when Lorraine knocked on my door. Because she would knock. That was never in question. The only question was whether she would understand by the time she left that she had knocked on the wrong door. The funeral was on a Saturday. Lorraine had arranged everything. I found this out not from her directly, but from Derek's cousin Tamara, who called me on Wednesday evening with the kind of careful, apologetic tone people use when they are delivering information they know will land badly. Lorraine had contacted the funeral home on Monday morning, less than 36 hours after Derek died, and had given them her credit card and her preferences and her vision for the service without calling me once. I was Derek's wife. I was the next of kin. I was the person the hospital had called at 2:47 in the morning. I was not consulted about a single detail. I found out the funeral was at Lorraine's church in Decatur, not the church Derek and I occasionally attended together, not anywhere that held meaning for our 14 years as a couple, but Lorraine's church, the one she had attended for 40 years, the one where she knew the pastor by his first name, and where the funeral would, I understood, immediately be entirely on her terms. I called Lorraine on Thursday morning. She answered on the first ring. I said, "I understand you've made arrangements." She said, "Someone had to." I let that sit for a moment. Then I asked about the service details, time, location, whether there would be a repast afterward. She gave me the information in the tone of someone reciting bus schedules. Saturday, 11 a.m., Greater Restoration Baptist. Repast at the Church Fellowship Hall. She had ordered the flowers. She had chosen the casket. She had written the obituary. I asked if I could see the obituary before it was printed. She said it had already gone to the printer. I said, "Lorraine, I'm his wife." She said, "I'm his mother." I hung up. I went to the funeral. I wore the black dress. I sat in the front row on the left side, the family side, because I was family regardless of what Lorraine's seating arrangement suggested. The sanctuary held about 200 people. Derek had been well liked. People came from his job, from his college fraternity, from the neighborhood he grew up in. Several of them hugged me in the receiving line. Several of them didn't know what to say and said too much. A few of them said nothing at all and just held my hands, and that was the most honest thing anyone did all morning. Simone was there. She sat in the fourth row on the right side. She was wearing a black dress with a high neck and her hair was pulled back. She did not approach me. I did not approach her. We existed in the same room for 2 hours, the way two people can exist in the same room when they have a precise and wordless understanding of what the other one knows. What I noticed, what I could not stop noticing, was that Lorraine knew who Simone was. I saw it in the way Lorraine's eyes found her when she entered the sanctuary. I saw it in the small nod Lorraine gave her from across the room. I saw it in the way, during the repast, Lorraine guided Simone toward the family tables and away from the general seating, a hand on the small of her back, brief, proprietary, the gesture of someone integrating a known quantity. Lorraine had known about Simone. I stood at the repast with a plate of food I didn't eat, and I recalibrated everything I thought I understood about the past 8 months. Lorraine had known, perhaps not from the beginning, perhaps not every detail. But she had known, and she had said nothing to me, and she was now organizing her son's funeral the way she saw fit with the woman her son had been seeing, placed carefully at the family tables, while his wife stood at the edges of the room, feeling like a guest at her own grief. I left at 2:30. I did not say goodbye to Lorraine. She called me that evening at 7:15. She did not open with condolences. She did not ask how I was holding up. She said she was calling about the practical matters. The repast had cost more than expected. There were outstanding bills from the funeral home, beyond what she had initially paid, and there were other expenses related to Derek's affairs that needed to be handled. I said, "What kind of expenses?" She said Derek had some personal debts she had become aware of. She said the family wanted to handle things properly and with dignity. She said it would be appropriate for me as his wife to contribute. Then she said, "I'm going to need your card number, Ivy." Not could you help, not would you consider. Your card number. I was standing in my kitchen. The overhead light was on. The house was very quiet. I looked at the notepad on the counter, the same notepad where I had written the Buckhead address 11 days ago. I said, "I'll think about it." She said, "There isn't much time to think. These things need to be handled." I said, "I'll be in touch, Lorraine." I hung up. I sat down at the kitchen table. I opened my laptop, and I pulled up James Whitfield's contact information. I had spoken to him once briefly the morning after Derek died. I had told him I would be in touch. I had spent the past 11 days gathering information, reviewing documents, and waiting. I had enough now. I called James. It was 7:23 in the evening. He answered. I said, "I want to list the house. Cash buyers only. I want to close in 10 days. He said, Ivy, I have a buyer who has been looking in Cascade Heights for 3 months. Pre-qualified cash ready to move. I can have an offer on the paper by Monday. I said, do it. I closed the laptop. I looked around my kitchen, the counters I had chosen, the backsplash I had installed on a long weekend in 2020, the drawer pulls I had replaced twice because I could never find the right ones, and then finally did. Lorraine wanted my card. She was about to find out that the card was the least interesting thing I had. Patricia called me on Monday morning at 8:52. I was at the kitchen table with coffee I had been nursing since 6:30, going through a work email I couldn't fully concentrate on. When her name appeared on my phone screen, I set the email aside and answered immediately. She said, the credit card records came in. I said, tell me. She read through it methodically. Patricia always moved through information in order chronologically without editorializing. And I had learned over 13 years to simply listen and let her finish before I asked anything. The card was a Visa signature through a regional bank Derek had opened an account with in February of the previous year, 14 months before he died. The credit limit was $25,000. The current balance was $47,340 over limit, flagged with 3 missed minimum payments in the final quarter. Patricia read the charges in categories the way an accountant would. Rent $3,200 per month, auto-drafted, to a property management company associated with the Buckhead high-rise on Peachtree Road. 14 months of payments. That alone was $44,800. Dining restaurants in Buckhead, Virginia, Highland, Inman Park. Consistently 2 people based on the bill amounts. Consistently Friday and Saturday evenings. Travel 2 airline tickets to Miami in April. 2 to New Orleans in July. A 4-night hotel stay in Charleston in September the same month. Derek had told me he was in Charlotte for a conference. Retail, a jewelry purchase in March at a store on Peachtree Street, $1,840. A spa package in May, $320. A handbag from a boutique in Buckhead in August, $975. I wrote none of this down. I remembered all of it. When Patricia finished reading, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Ivy, the total expenditure on this card over 14 months, including interest and fees, is approximately $61,000. I said, and the balance he left is $47,340. She said, correct. That debt belongs to his estate. I said, what does his estate consist of? This was the question I had been building toward for 11 days. I already knew most of the answer. But I needed to hear Patricia say it in the clear, precise language she used when the facts were unambiguous. She said, Derek's estate consists of his personal checking account, $2,847 remaining after his final direct deposit cleared last week. His vehicle, a 2021 Lexus ES, which has $18,400 remaining on the loan, and a current market value of approximately $22,000, leaving equity of roughly $3,600. His employer life insurance, $150,000 with you as named beneficiary. And personal effects. She paused. She said, there is no real property, no investment accounts, no savings beyond the checking account balance. The Buckhead apartment was a rental. The credit card debt of $47,340 will need to be settled against the estate assets. I did the arithmetic quickly. $2,847 plus $3. $600 in vehicle equity, call it $6. $400 in liquid estate assets against $47,340 in debt. The estate was effectively insolvent before the credit card company even filed its claim. The life insurance was separate. It passed directly to me as beneficiary and was not subject to estate debts. I said, so when Lorraine talks about Derek's debts needing to be handled, Patricia said, She either doesn't know the full picture yet, or she's hoping you don't. Either way, you have no legal obligation to pay a single dollar of Derek's personal credit card debt. It's his estate's liability, not yours. And his estate doesn't have enough to cover it. I said, "What about the car?" Patricia said the car loan was in Derek's name alone. The lender would make a claim against the estate. After they settled, there would be approximately $3,600 in equity, which would go toward the credit card balance, leaving roughly $43,000 in unsecured debt that the credit card company would likely write off after the estate was closed. I said, "And there's nothing Lorraine can do to come after the house." Patricia said, "The house is not part of Derek's estate. It never was. She could hire an attorney and file something to make your life difficult for a few months, but she would lose. The quitclaim acknowledgement Derek signed in 2014 is airtight. I drafted it myself." I thanked her. I asked her to begin the formal estate accounting and to send me the documentation in writing. She said she would have it to me by Wednesday. Then she said, in the quieter tone she used when she was speaking as something closer to a friend than an attorney, "Ivy, James Whitfield called my office this morning. He said you've accepted an offer on the house." I said, "I have." She said, $680,000 cash, closing in 10 days. I said, "That's correct." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "The buyer's attorney will need to verify clear title. I'll coordinate with James's office. There should be no complications." I said, "I know." Another pause. Then, "Do you want to tell me what you're planning?" I said, "Lorraine is coming to this house, Patricia. She thinks she's coming to collect something. I want everything documented and verified before she walks through that door so that when she tells me what she's owed, I can tell her exactly what exists and exactly what doesn't." Patricia said nothing for a moment. Then she said, "I'll have the estate accounting to you by Tuesday." It arrived Tuesday afternoon. 12 pages. Every account, every asset, every liability laid out in the clean and merciless language of formal legal documentation. I read it twice. I printed one copy and placed it in a manila folder on the kitchen counter. Next to the manila folder, I placed James Whitfield's copy of the signed purchase agreement. $680,000. Cash, buyer's name, a real estate investment group out of Sandy Springs. Closing date 12 days from today. My signature was already on it, neat and small the way I signed everything. Next to those two documents, I placed Patricia's business card. Then I called Lorraine. She answered on the second ring. I told her I had been going through Derek's affairs and that I had some information she needed to hear. I told her she should come to the house on Thursday. I told her she could bring whoever she needed to bring. She said, "It's about time." I said, "Yes." I said it the way you say something when you are the only person in the conversation who understands what it means. She didn't notice. She never did. They arrived at 2:00 in the afternoon on a Thursday. Lorraine, her two sons, Derek's brothers Marcus Jr. and Calvin, and Calvin's wife, a woman named Deb, who had never particularly liked me and had stopped pretending otherwise sometime around 2019. 4 people. Lorraine had mentioned she might bring someone. She had not mentioned she was bringing an audience. I had known she would anyway. I had set the living room before they arrived, the way I set everything deliberately without hurry. 4 chairs arranged facing the couch where I would sit. A pitcher of water on the coffee table with 4 glasses. The manila folder and the purchase agreement and Patricia's business card in a neat stack on the side table to my right, face down. The room was clean. The afternoon light came through the front windows at a low angle and made everything look warmer than it was. I was wearing dark charcoal slacks and a white silk blouse, and the low heels I wore to contract signings. I had my hair down. I had slept 7 hours the night before for the first time since Derek died. I opened the door before Lorraine knocked. She was wearing her church coat, a structured burgundy wool that she saved for occasions she considered important. Marcus Jr. was behind her in a jacket and tie. Calvin had on a fleece and jeans. Deb had on the expression she always wore around me, which was the careful blankness of someone managing active dislike. I said, "Come in." They filed into the living room. Lorraine looked around the room the way she always looked at my house appraisingly, as though she were cataloging everything in it and assigning it value. She had never said anything directly critical about the way I kept the house, but she had a particular way of pausing before she sat down, a slight delay, like she was granting the furniture permission. She sat. The others sat. I sat on the couch across from them. I poured water into the 4 glasses and pushed the pitcher toward the center of the table. Lorraine did not touch hers. She put her purse on her lap and folded her hands over it and looked at me. She said, "I'm glad you're finally ready to talk about this, Ivy. There are things that need to be settled." I said, "I agree." She said Derek's passing had left the family with responsibilities. She said there were outstanding costs from the funeral she had, as she put it, extended herself significantly to give Derek a proper homegoing. And she felt it was only right that his wife contribute to those costs, now that the immediate grief had passed and practical matters needed to be addressed. Then she said there were other things. Derek had mentioned to her, she said, that he and I had been discussing his having a stake in the house. That it had always been the intention for the house to reflect both of their investments in the marriage. Marcus Jr. nodded when she said this. Calvin looked at the floor. I let her finish. When she was done, I picked up the glass of water in front of me and took a small sip and set it back down. I said, "Lorraine, I want to make sure I understand what you're saying. You're telling me that Derek told you he had a stake in this house." She said that was correct. I said, "And you're asking me to cover funeral costs and other expenses related to Derek's affairs." She said that was also correct. She said the family had done everything for the funeral, and it was only fair. I said, "The funeral cost $14,200. You put $9,000 on your card and asked the church to cover the rest as a bereavement allowance. I verified this with the funeral home on Monday." Lorraine's mouth closed. I reached to my right and picked up the manila folder. I opened it and placed it on the coffee table facing her. I said, "This is the formal estate accounting prepared by my attorney. It documents every asset and every liability Derek left behind at the time of his death." Lorraine looked at the document but did not pick it up. I said, "Derek's estate has 2 assets of value. His personal checking account, which had $2,847 in it when it was frozen, and his car, a 2021 Lexus, with approximately $3,600 in equity after the loan is paid off. That's roughly $6,400 total." Calvin looked up from the floor. I said, "His estate also has one significant liability. A Visa signature credit card with a balance of $47,340. The card was opened 14 months ago and was used primarily to fund a rental apartment in Buckhead and associated expenses." The room was very quiet. Deb shifted in her chair. Marcus Jr. had stopped nodding. Lorraine said, "What apartment?" I said, "The apartment where Derek died, Lorraine. The apartment he had been renting for Simone for 14 months at $3,200 a month." She said nothing. I said, "The estate is insolvent. The credit card debt exceeds the assets by approximately $41,000. There is nothing for the family to claim because there is nothing in the estate to claim. The funeral costs are your responsibility. The credit card debt will be settled against what little exists in the estate, and the remainder will be written off." Marcus Jr. said, "What about this house?" I picked up the purchase agreement from the side table. I placed it on top of the estate accounting facing them. I said, "This house sold on Monday. Cash sale $680,000. Closing is in 9 days." The silence that followed was a different kind of silence than the one before it. Heavier, more specific. Lorraine said, "You can't sell this house." Derek. I said, "Derek's name was never on this house, Lorraine. Not when I bought it in 2011. Not when we got married in 2014. He signed a quitclaim acknowledgement at the time of our marriage confirming he had no ownership interest. My attorney drafted it. Derek signed it. It is a legally binding document." I reached for Patricia's business card and placed it beside the purchase agreement. I said, "If you'd like to verify any of this, you're welcome to contact my attorney directly. Her number is on that card." Lorraine looked at Patricia's card. She looked at the purchase agreement. She looked at the estate accounting. Then she looked at me. She said, "You planned this." I said, "I planned to protect what was mine." "That's not the same thing." She said, "Derek was your husband." I said, "He was, and he spent 14 months and $61,000 funding an apartment for another woman on a credit card that was in his name alone. I didn't plan that part. He did." Marcus Jr. stood up. He said something about lawyers, about contesting about what the family was owed. His voice had the particular pitch of a man who is angry because he has just realized he has no leverage. I picked up my phone from the cushion beside me. I dialed Patricia's office. Her assistant answered on the second ring. I said I needed Patricia to confirm for a third party that the estate accounting was accurate and that the house sale was proceeding with clear title. Patricia came on the line 30 seconds later. I put the phone on speaker and set it on the coffee table. Patricia's voice filled the room. Calm, precise, the voice of someone who had been doing this for 30 years and had never once been rattled by a man standing in someone else's living room making threats he couldn't back up. She confirmed the estate accounting. She confirmed the house title was clear. She confirmed there was no legal basis for any claim against the property by Derek's family. Marcus Jr. sat back down. When Patricia finished, I thanked her and ended the call. The room was very quiet again. Lorraine stood up. She picked up her purse. She looked at me one more time. A long look, the kind that was meant to carry weight to land somewhere soft and make me feel something. She had been using that look on me for 10 years. It had worked in the past the way things work when you are not yet sure of your own ground. I looked back at her steadily. She turned toward the door. Calvin and Deb followed. Marcus Jr. paused at the threshold and said, "This isn't over." I said, "It is, Marcus." He left. Lorraine was last. She walked to the front door and reached for the handle. In the moment before she opened it, she stepped down from the small interior landing onto the single porch step and missed it. Her heel caught the edge her body pitched forward, and she grabbed the door frame with both hands to steady herself. She did not fall, but she stumbled visibly in the open doorway, in the afternoon light, in her good church coat. No one reached out to help her. There was no one left in the room to do it. She recovered her footing. She walked to the car without looking back. I stood in the middle of my living room. The afternoon light was still coming through the front windows. The 4 glasses of water sat untouched on the coffee table. The documents were still spread across the surface, the estate accounting, the purchase agreement, Patricia's business card, arranged exactly as I had placed them. I picked up my glass and finished what was left in it. Then I went to the kitchen to start dinner, because it was 3:47 in the afternoon, and I hadn't eaten since morning. And some things simply continue, regardless of what else has happened. Marcus Jr. called a lawyer. I found out on Friday morning, the day after they left my living room, when Patricia called to tell me she had received a letter from an attorney named Gerald Fitch, operating out of a strip mall office in Decatur, asserting that Derek's family intended to contest the sale of the house on the grounds of equitable contribution to the marital estate. I asked Patricia what that meant in practical terms. She said it meant Gerald Fitch had taken Marcus Jr.'s money and written a letter using words that sounded serious, but described a legal theory with no viable path forward given the existing documentation. She said she would respond by end of business today. She said I should not lose sleep over it. I said I wasn't planning to. I hung up and went back to the coffee I'd been drinking, and the box I'd been packing kitchen items, the ones I'd chosen myself over 14 years, wrapped individually in newspaper the way my mother had taught me when we moved apartments 3 times before I was 12. I had been packing since Wednesday morning. Methodically, one room at a time, starting with the things I cared about least and working toward the things I cared about most. The closing was in 8 days. Patricia responded to Gerald Fitch's letter at 4:47 that afternoon. She sent me a copy. It was 4 paragraphs. The first paragraph summarized the relevant facts: the 2011 purchase, the 2014 quitclaim acknowledgement, the absence of Derek's name from any property document in 14 years. The second paragraph addressed the equitable contribution theory directly and explained with the precision of someone who found the argument mildly insulting why it had no merit under Georgia law given the existing documentation. The third paragraph noted that the house sale was proceeding on schedule and that any attempt to delay or obstruct the closing would be met with a motion for sanctions. The fourth paragraph was 1 sentence. Please advise your clients accordingly. I read it twice. I saved it to a folder on my desktop labeled Simply House. Gerald Fitch did not respond. The dominoes, once they started, moved faster than I expected. On Saturday, 3 days after Lorraine left my living room, Lorraine called Tamara, Derek's cousin, the one who had called me the week of the funeral, with a careful, apologetic voice. Tamara called me an hour after Lorraine called her. She said Lorraine was telling people in the family that I had blindsided them, that I had been planning to sell the house while Derek was barely cold, that I had hidden assets and deceived the family about the estate. I said, "Tamara, do you want to know what actually happened?" She said she did. I told her. Not everything. Not the Buckhead apartment in full detail, not the credit card statement line by line, but enough. I told her about the quitclaim. I told her about the estate accounting. I told her that the house had been mine since 2011 and that Derek had signed documentation confirming that fact the year we got married. Tamara was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Lorraine knew about Simone, didn't she?" It wasn't a question. I said, "I think she knew for a while." Tamara said, "I'm sorry, Ivy. I'm really sorry." I told her it wasn't her fault. I told her I appreciated her calling. We talked for a few more minutes about nothing important and then said goodbye, and I understood that whatever happened next within Derek's family was their business and no longer mine. On Monday, 6 days before closing, the credit card company filed its claim against Derek's estate. Patricia handled it. The Lexus would be sold. She had already contacted a dealer who would pay $22,000 for it, clearing the loan and leaving $3,600 in equity. And that amount, combined with the checking account balance, would be applied to the credit card debt. The remaining $40,893 would be written off as an uncollectible estate debt. Derek's credit card company sent a letter to the Buckhead apartment address. The letter was returned to sender. Simone, it appeared, was no longer there. On Tuesday, Patricia received a second communication, not from Gerald Fitch this time, but from the property management company that had managed the Buckhead apartment. They were notifying the estate that the lease, which had been in Derek's name as the financial guarantor, was being terminated due to the guarantor's death and the missed final month's payment. The tenant, Simone, had been given 30 days' notice to vacate. Patricia forwarded it to me with no comment. I read it once and closed the email. On Wednesday, Marcus Jr. called me directly. I let it go to voicemail. His message was 4 minutes long, shorter than his mother's, but louder, moving through anger, and then something closer to pleading, and then back to anger again, landing finally on a version of the argument that if I had any decency, any respect for Derek's memory, any regard for the family that had welcomed me for 14 years, I would reconsider. I listened to it once. I did not call back. That evening, Calvin called. His message was different, quieter, more careful, the voice of a man who had thought about what he wanted to say before he said it. He said he wasn't calling to make demands. He said he just wanted me to know that he understood things hadn't been right between Derek and me for a long time, and that he was sorry for his part in how things had gone on Thursday, and that he hoped I was doing okay. I listened to that one twice. I called Calvin back. We talked for 20 minutes. He asked how I was. I told him the truth, that I was tired, that I was sad, in a way that was complicated by everything I had found out, that I was looking forward to being somewhere new. He said that made sense. He said he was sorry about Simone. He said he hadn't known, and I believed him. I told him to take care of himself. He said the same. We hung up, and I sat for a while in the kitchen. There was now half-packed boxes stacked against the wall, the backsplash I had installed, exposed and clean under the overhead light. Thursday came, then Friday. On Friday afternoon, with 2 days before closing, I finished packing the last room. The house was empty, in a way that houses become empty when everything personal has been removed. Not sad exactly, but hollowed, stripped back to what it had always been underneath the accumulated years. 4 walls, good bones, a mortgage that had been paid on time for 14 years. I walked through every room once. Kitchen, dining room, living room, the hallway with the refinished floors, the 2 bedrooms upstairs, the bathroom with the tile I had chosen from 3 samples on a Sunday afternoon in 2015 while Derek watched football downstairs. I did not feel what I expected to feel. I had anticipated something heavier, grief, maybe, or loss, or the particular ache of leaving a place that had held 14 years of a life. Instead, what I felt was something simpler and harder to name. Something like completion, the sense of a thing having run its full course and arrived at its natural end. I went back downstairs. In the living room, on the mantel above the fireplace, I had left one thing. My wedding ring. I had taken it off the morning after the hospital called. I had placed it on the nightstand and not put it back on. I had carried it in my coat pocket for 2 weeks without knowing what to do with it. And then the morning I started packing, I had set it on the mantel and known that was where it would stay. Plain gold band. $340 from a jewelry store in Little Five Points. We had chosen it together on a Saturday morning in February 2014. Derek had wanted something more elaborate. I had wanted something I could wear every day without thinking about it. I looked at it for a moment. Then I picked up the last box, the one with the Post-it note in it, the one that said $87, $500 in handwriting from 15 years ago, and I walked to the front door. I turned off the lights as I went. The closing was on a Monday morning at 10:00 a.m. Patricia's office. Not a title company, she had arranged it that way deliberately on her ground at her table. With her notary and her coffee and her 30 years of knowing exactly what every document in the stack meant before anyone else in the room had finished reading the cover page. I arrived at 9:45. I was wearing the camel coat. I had slept 8 hours the night before in the apartment I had signed a lease on the previous Wednesday, a 2-bedroom on the 4th floor of a building in Inman Park, 12 minutes from my office, with east-facing windows that let in the morning light, and a kitchen that smelled like fresh paint and possibility. I had slept on an air mattress because my furniture was in a storage unit, and I would not have it delivered until after the closing, and I had slept better on that air mattress than I had slept in my own bed in longer than I could clearly remember. The buyer's representative was already in the conference room. When I arrived, a woman named Helen, mid-40s, from the Sandy Springs Investment Group, efficient and pleasant in the way of someone who closed a lot of transactions and had long since stopped finding them dramatic. She shook my hand. We sat on opposite sides of the table. Patricia sat at the head. The documents took 47 minutes to execute. I signed my name 31 times. I had counted afterward because it seemed like a number worth knowing. 31 signatures to transfer a house I had bought with one check and one signature 15 years ago. Progress, maybe, or just paperwork, probably both. When the last document was signed and notarized, Helen slid a single sheet across the table, the wire transfer confirmation. $680, 000 less, the realtor commission of $40, $800 and closing costs of $7, $340 for a net proceeds figure of $631, $860 transferred to my personal account, effective that morning. I looked at the number for a moment. Then I thanked Helen and shook her hand again, and followed Patricia out to the small sitting area near the elevator, where Patricia kept a coffee station that was better than the one in her conference room. Patricia poured 2 cups. She handed me one. She sat down across from me in one of the low chairs she kept for moments like this, the after moments when the documents were done, and what remained was just the human part. She said, "How do you feel?" I thought about it honestly, the way she had always expected me to think about things. I said, "Lighter." She nodded like that was exactly the right answer. We sat for a few minutes without talking, which was something Patricia and I had always been able to do, sit in the same room without filling it. It was one of the things I valued most about her and about very few other people. Then she said, "Simone called my office last Thursday." I looked at her. She said, "She didn't leave a detailed message. My assistant said she sounded distressed. She left a number and asked if you would call her back." I said, "Why would she call your office?" Patricia said, "She may not have had your direct number, or she may have thought going through counsel was the appropriate channel." A pause. "Or she may have been hoping that going through counsel would make you more likely to respond." I said, "What did she want?" Patricia said she didn't know specifically. Her assistant hadn't pressed for details. But she said the timing was consistent with what she had seen in the estate paperwork. The Buckhead apartment lease termination notice had gone out the week before. Simone had 30 days to vacate a $3,200 a month apartment that had been paid for by a dead man's credit card that was now in default. Whatever she had expected from the arrangement with Derek's security, maybe, or something that looked like a future, had evaporated along with the estate. I held my coffee cup with both hands. I thought about Simone in the hospital waiting room at 3:00 in the morning in her silk sleep set, and her grabbed cardigan holding a paper cup the same way I was holding this one now. I thought about her sitting in the 4th row at the funeral wearing the high-necked black dress, not approaching me, not meeting my eyes. I thought about the handkerchief with the monogrammed S that I had refolded and put back in Derek's breast pocket and said nothing about for 8 months. I thought about all of it for a moment. Then I said, "I'm not going to call her back." Patricia nodded. She did not say anything further on the subject. That was the correct response, and she knew it, and I knew it, and we moved on. I finished my coffee. I stood up. I put on my coat. Patricia walked me to the elevator. She pressed the button, and we stood waiting for it in the quiet hallway. She said, "What's next for you?" I said I had a work project that had been waiting for my attention for 3 weeks. I said I needed to get my furniture out of storage. I said I had a list of things I wanted to do in the new apartment, small things. The kind that make a space feel inhabited rather than occupied. New drawer pulls, a plant for the kitchen windowsill, a print for the hallway wall, something I had been wanting to buy for 2 years and kept putting off for no reason I could clearly articulate. Patricia smiled. An actual smile, not the almost smile from that first morning in her office. She said, That sounds right. The elevator came. I stepped in. She said, Ivy. I turned. She said, you did everything correctly. I want you to know that. Every decision, every document, every phone call, all of it. I said, I learned from a good attorney. She laughed a short, real laugh, the kind that surprises you when it comes out. The elevator doors closed. I rode down to the lobby and walked out onto Peachtree Street into a cold, clear Monday morning in Atlanta. The sky was the particular blue that only appears in November, high and sharp and completely without ambiguity. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment with $631.860 in my bank account, and no house, and no husband, and no weight that I had not chosen to carry. A bus went by. A woman walked past me with a stroller and a coffee and a phone tucked between her ear and shoulder. A delivery truck was double parked in front of the building next door, and a man in a uniform was unloading boxes with the particular efficiency of someone who does the same thing every day and has made peace with it. The city moved the way cities move, without pausing, without acknowledging, without any awareness at all that something had just ended and something else was about to begin. I turned up the collar of my camel coat against the cold. I walked to my car. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I took it out and looked at the screen. It was a text from Renee, my sister, my life insurance beneficiary, the person who had driven to my house the morning after Derek died, and sat at my kitchen table for 4 hours without asking me to explain or perform or be anything other than what I was. The text said, "Closing done. Tell me everything. Also, I found a plant for your kitchen. It's called a pothos. Apparently you can't kill it. I'm bringing it Thursday." I stopped walking. I stood on the sidewalk on Peachtree Street on a cold, clear Monday in November, and I read that text twice and felt something move in my chest. Not grief, not the complicated, hollow sadness of the past 3 weeks, but something warmer and more ordinary than that. Something that felt surprisingly like the beginning of being fine. I typed back, "Done. $631.860. Come Thursday. Bring the plant." I put my phone in my pocket. I walked to my car, and I drove to my new apartment, and I made a list of everything I needed, starting with drawer pulls, and ending with nothing in particular, just open space, just what came next. The pothos arrived on Thursday. Renee carried it through the door of my new apartment in a terracotta pot she had repainted herself. Deep green matte finish, a small, imperfect brushstroke along the rim where her hand had slipped. She set it on the kitchen windowsill without asking where I wanted it, because she knew me well enough to know that the kitchen windowsill was exactly where I would have put it anyway. She looked around the apartment. Furniture delivered Tuesday, the pieces I had chosen and paid for myself. None of it from the house on Cascade Road. All of it new, starting from nothing, the way I had always been most comfortable starting things. She walked through the 2 bedrooms and the bathroom and came back to the kitchen and leaned against the counter and said, "It's good, Ivy. It feels like you." I said, "That's the idea." She stayed for 4 hours. We ordered food from a Thai place 2 blocks away and ate it at the kitchen table I had bought on Sunday, a small round 1-2 chairs exactly the right size for the space and for the life I was currently living. We talked about her kids and her job and a trip she was planning in the spring. We talked about our mother, who had called me every day for the past 3 weeks, and who I had let go to voicemail more times than I could count, and who I was going to call back this weekend properly with enough time to actually talk. We did not talk about Derek very much. When we did, it was briefly, and without drama. Renee had her opinions, and she kept most of them to herself because she understood that this particular grief was layered in a way that didn't respond well to other people's clarity. She had been that way since we were children. It was one of her best qualities. When she left, she hugged me at the door for a long time without saying anything. Then she pulled back and looked at me and said, "You good?" I said, "I'm getting there." She nodded like that was the correct and honest answer, which it was, and she left. I stood in the middle of my new apartment after she was gone and listened to the particular quiet of a space that belonged entirely to me, not the quiet of the house on Cascade Road after Derek had stopped being present in it in any real way. That had been a heavier quiet, weighted with everything unsaid, with the accumulated silence of two people who had stopped being curious about each other and hadn't admitted it yet. This was different. This was the quiet of a clean beginning. The quiet of a room waiting to become familiar. I went to the kitchen windowsill and looked at the pothos. It was a small plant, a few trailing vines, leaves the deep green of something that had been well cared for. Renee had said you couldn't kill it. I believed her. I had never been particularly good with plants, not because I lacked patience, but because I had always been better with things that held still document structures, the clean logic of a contract that said exactly what it meant. But I thought I could manage a pothos. I thought that was a reasonable place to start. I touched one of the leaves. It was cool and smooth under my finger. I went to bed at 10 o'clock and slept without interruption until 6:15 in the morning, when the east-facing windows filled with the kind of early light that makes everything look provisional and new. I lay in it for a while without reaching for my phone. Just the light and the ceiling and the quiet and the distant sound of the city beginning its day outside. At some point in those still minutes, I thought about the house on Cascade Road, not with longing, not the way I'd expected to think about it, with the pull of 14 years and the weight of everything that had happened inside its walls. I thought about it the way you think about a thing that did what it was supposed to do, and is finished now. The house had been shelter and security and the foundation of everything I had built. It had been mine in the most fundamental sense, purchased alone, maintained carefully protected when it needed protecting. And then it had been $631, $860 in a bank account, and east-facing windows, and a pothos on a kitchen windowsill, and 8 uninterrupted hours of sleep. That was not a small thing. That was not a consolation prize. That was exactly what I had built it to be. I thought about the Post-it note. $87, $500 in my handwriting, from 15 years ago, folded into the box that was now in my bedroom closet. I had not unpacked it yet. I would probably frame it or put it somewhere I could see it, or maybe just keep it in the box, because it had always been more about knowing it was there than about displaying it. Either way, it would stay. Some things you keep not because they are useful, but because they remind you of who you were when you were just beginning to understand who you were going to be. I got up at 6:30. I made coffee. I stood at the kitchen window with the cup in both hands and looked out at Inman Park, beginning to wake the dog walkers and the early joggers, and the man across the street who put his recycling out on Thursdays and always forgot at least one bin. Ordinary things, the texture of a life resuming. My phone was on the counter. I picked it up and opened my contacts and found my mother's name and called her. She answered on the second ring. She said, "Ivy." Just my name, the way she had been saying it for 42 years, with everything she meant by it, compressed into those 2 syllables, relief and love, and the particular maternal anxiety of a woman who has watched her daughter handle hard things alone and has never fully made peace with not being able to help more. I said, "Hi, Mama." She said, "Are you okay?" I said, "I'm okay. I'm really okay." She said, "Tell me everything." So I did. I stood at the kitchen window of my new apartment in Inman Park, with the east-facing light coming in and the pothos on the windowsill behind me, and I told my mother everything. Not all of it, not the credit card statements line by line, or the quitclaim acknowledgement, or the specific language of Patricia's letter to Gerald Fitch, but the shape of it, the arc of it, what had happened, and what I had done, and where I had landed. I told her about the closing. I told her about the number. I told her about the plant. She listened the way she had always listened, without interrupting, without offering solutions, without trying to assign blame or redirect or soften anything. just listening, which was the most useful thing anyone had done for me in the past 3 weeks, and possibly longer. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Your grandmother always said a woman should know what she owns." I said, "She was right." She said, "She was right about most things. Took me too long to understand that." We talked for another hour. When we hung up, I felt something settle in my chest, not resolution exactly, because some things don't resolve so much as they gradually become part of the landscape, something you learn to live alongside without letting it define the view. But something close to that. Something like the beginning of being able to look forward without first having to look back. I spent the rest of the morning unpacking the last boxes. I found the right place for everything. Not quickly, not without revision, moving things from one spot to another until the arrangement felt honest rather than just convenient. The books, the kitchen items wrapped in newspaper, the framed print I had finally bought, the one I had been putting off for 2 years now, leaning against the hallway wall waiting to be hung. I unpacked the box with a post-it note last. I held it for a moment. Small, yellowed at the edges, the ink slightly faded, but still perfectly legible. $87.500. My handwriting at 31. The number I had written on my bathroom mirror and looked at every morning for 4 years until it became real. I set it on the kitchen counter next to my coffee cup. I looked at it for a while. Then I got a frame from the closet, a simple black one I had bought at a shop on Thursday without knowing exactly what I would put in it, and I framed the post-it note and hung it on the kitchen wall above the counter, where I would see it every morning. Not as a monument, not as a warning, just as a reminder of the only thing that had ever actually kept me standing, the knowledge accumulated carefully over a lifetime of exactly what I was worth and exactly what I owned. I am not telling you this story, so you will be angry on my behalf, though you may be, and that's all right. I am telling you this because I spent 14 years in a house I built alone. And somewhere along the way, I started to believe that the building was less important than the being in it together, that the foundation mattered less than the warmth on top of it. And that belief, left unexamined, almost cost me the only thing no one had ever been able to take from me. What I know now, what I knew before. If I'm being precise, but what I finally allowed myself to act on, Ed says this: the most important investments you make are not the ones other people see. They are the quiet ones, the early mornings, the post-it notes, the documents filed and the attorneys called and the accounts maintained in your own name, not out of suspicion, but out of the clear-eyed understanding that you are always first and finally responsible for your own ground. Know what you own. Keep what is yours. And when someone tells you that your name on a document is less important than love, know that the two are not in conflict. Know that a woman who understands her own worth is not a cold woman or a suspicious woman or a woman without love. She is simply a woman who will still be standing when the ground shifts. And the ground always shifts eventually. That is not pessimism. That is just how ground works. Build accordingly.